Okay, again, everybody, welcome back to Wrestling with the Law and Stuff. I am here with Sean Gorman. As you said, we had a few technical issues that were a problem for a while. And I think there's still going to be some difficulty hearing for Sean on the other end, but we're going to take our best shot at it. First of all, Sean, thank you very much for joining us here today. It's absolutely wonderful to have you. And he didn't hear a word I said, did he? No, he just... Yeah, he froze. All right, folks. Well, clearly we are having a day, so we're going to have to... I think we're going to have to figure out a few issues and then come back on this. Are you there, Sean? Screen is frozen. Yeah, it's telling me the screen is frozen now. Let's see. We'll see if we can tell him to go out and come in. Well, this is the problem, I think, with trying to do a live product. Because we want to get him started on this book. I mean, there are two books that he wrote that really I can't say enough about, folks. I mean, one is, as he said, Until We're Strangers Again was his wrestling memoir. And he really goes into detail about learning his craft, about being able to create stories and storylines, but he also opens himself up. I think the other thing that's really important is his Stories from the Handbasket. And that's a lot more of a personal book that Sean wrote, much more personal, in that it reveals a great deal about his younger years, about his life growing up in Medfield. And let's see, we may get lucky. There. Okay, here we I see you. Boom. Okay, there we are. All right, we're going to see if we can get our way through it. For anybody who's watching, please tell your friends to go ahead and join us now. We're going to muscle through this thing as best we can. I was just telling everybody, Sean, that one of the things that was great for us was having read both Until We're Strangers Again, which was really your look at your pro wrestling life and how you got into it, as well as your life over at a couple of institutions, one of which is no longer with us. That, of course, is the Phoenix. Yeah. and then of course it was talking about the Stories from the Handbasket. Now, the Stories from the Handbasket is extremely personal, particularly when we start to talk about your brother Tim. I mean, really personal. So what I want to talk about is, let's talk about Sean Gorman, who clearly decided at a young age he wanted to be a storyteller. And let's talk about what made you want to become a storyteller.
I don't know if I ever set out to do that, but if I go way back, and I get into this in the second book, Stories from the Handbasket, do you remember those Star Wars or the storybooks with a record? This is going to make it sound like we're 1,000 years old. You listen to the record as you read along in the storybook.
Oh, yeah.
Do you remember those? Yeah.
Oh,
okay.
yes, I remember those.
Yeah, I mean, I think looking back on it, and tell me if you agree with this, that was a really good way to learn how to read and take in a story, and because you're hearing it and seeing it and looking at pictures all at the same time. So it was a very stimulating. I mean, reading is an insular thing that just stimulates the interior mind, but with a record and the storybook and everything, it was really sparking my brain, I think. And if I had to say where it all started, it would be with that.
And so from there, you started also very young, crafting out a lot of creative writing. I noticed that you journaled very early. Do you recall about what age you were when you started journaling?
Yeah. I started journaling probably when I was 14. I actually they're sitting right here next to me. Actually, all my journals from when I was an adolescent all the way, and I kept it all the way until I was probably about 30. In some places, as you can imagine. But I'm glad I have it, because a lot of people asked me, how do you remember all that detail? Well, the truth is, I didn't. I can just look it up in my journal. So.
Now, you open up really well. When we're talking about the Stories from the Handbasket, you open up a lot about yourself. And I think one of the things that some people might have been hesitant to have been as open as you were in that. And here's what I mean by that. You talk very openly about the relationship with your stepfather, what it was. You talk very openly about your juvenile delinquency.
Yeah.
And you also talk very openly about the relationship you and other young men had to local law enforcement in Medfield. So all of this raised a question for me. It's Medfield,
Yeah.
correct? Yeah.
Yes, Medfield, not
Yeah.
Medford, Medfield.
Yeah. Here's what I want to ask. How did growing up in Medfield shape you, and does it still shape you today?
Well, Medfield is a very different place now than what it was when I was growing up here. In the my grandparents moved here in the 1950s because it was really cheap to live here because it was the boondocks and nobody wanted to live here. And my grandfather had the foresight to see that Boston was getting, the suburbs are moving further and further away from Boston. So in the 1980s, there was a housing boom, and what went from a very rural, working class town, I'm just going to be honest, the yuppies moved in, the wealthy yuppies moved in. So you had almost a class war going on. And I mean, nobody here was poor, but as I say in the book, there was a very distinct line between the haves and the have-it-alls.
Yes.
And I literally was from the wrong side of the tracks, myself and all my juvenile delinquent friends. And as far as my relationship with law enforcement goes, as I say in the book, in the part where I believe it's the Whitey chapter, there was one black kid in the entire school, and he had rap music, and I put on NWA, and they had the song "Fuck the Police," and I was like, yes, I wasn't a rap fan or anything.
No, at the time
but
you were very much a metal fan, were you not? Yes. So let's divulge a little bit or diverge a little bit. And let me ask, for somebody who found heavy metal to be kind of your noise for the great, rebellious young guy that you were, and I think in the book you even talk about how it was about sex and death, and you didn't.
Yeah.
You talk about how much you couldn't stand grudge because it was lamenting that your parents treated you badly, and with death it was like you just kick your parents' ass. What was it about
Right.
NWA that called to you and said, "Oh no, that gets me"?
Well, both heavy metal and, well, specifically NWA and I guess Public Enemy, right? I mean, they're both rebellious in nature, and they were both rebellious against authority, So, as I say, as everyone knows, NWA stands for Niggers with Attitude, and as I say in the book, there was no black people here in Medfield, so you know who were the niggers in our town? The kids with the long hair and the Megadeth shirts. That's who the cops fucked with. And I mean, look, am I saying that I know what it's like to be black? No. Do I know what it's like to be harassed by the police? Definitely. I mean, they didn't use racial slurs, but we had long hair and they used to call us faggots all the time. They would just put you up against the wall. They would, just walk over to you in the parking lot, start searching your car for no reason. I tell young people now, just imagine what it was like before cell phone cameras. Nobody was going to see it. Nobody was going to care. So
yeah, there's a story you tell about in the book in which a police officer who was giving you guys a hard time because you're eating in the parking lot at Burger King,
right?
Who then tries tries to go ahead and roll up on you, and as he rolls up, he gets out of the car, and then the cruiser just goes crashing right into the automobile of one of your friend's mother.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. He tried to, as you said, roll up on us like a hard ass, and he opened the door and tried to get out of the cruiser before he had put the cruiser in park, and he just slammed into us. And oh boy, his attitude changed so fast. He did that.
Now you also noted in that story that I believe it was a police captain who shows up. Yeah, and that captain had a very different approach. And tell us a little bit about what you learned from seeing these two different approaches from these two different individuals in law enforcement.
Well, I guess captain was very calm, cool, and polite. It couldn't be more polite. The accident was very evident, that we were not at fault. I mean, the cop ran into a car vehicle for kids who, weren't even loitering. The only reason we had to take our food outside was because Burger King was about to close. He just said, here's the insurance information for the town of Medway. You have a good night, gentlemen. And we were like, thank you, sir. And he's like, finish your meal. And we were like, oh, we plan to. But yeah, that cop gave him the whole driver's side door of my friend's mother's car. Brand new car, by the way. Unbelievable. Hello?
Yeah. There we go. Yeah. You also expressed that you had a concern. All three of you had a concern that the officer at that point may very well turn around and write a report that was going to show that you had been at fault, that you had been misbehaving. Growing up with that kind of relationship with law enforcement, particularly right now when you're seeing things that are happening on TV, do you find yourself identifying more with people who are being pushed by police than you are the people who are like, why don't they just do what the cops say?
Well, it depends what's going on. The last time I checked, throwing a brick through the window of the store and looting is definitely against the law. But yeah, but the people protesting, it's hard in this digital age when you see a clip on TV or the internet, you don't know what happened right before the camera started rolling, Mm-hmm. So, I'll be honest, I've been kind of tuned out with the media. We live in weird times, man. It's hard to know what to trust, even if you're looking at it, So, I guess it depends what's going on. Like, if it's people peacefully protesting, the cops are pushing them around, then yes, I identify with the protesters. If it's a guy who whips a trash barrel at a cop, then I'm kind of on the cop side. Because last time I checked, you can't whip a trash barrel at a police officer, which is a video I saw, from Boston on Tremont Street. A guy just whipped the trash barrel at the officer. I'm like, okay.
Now, it's fair to say, though, as well, that you've been a probably an inherent skeptic for a long, long time about just about everything. And in fact, a lot of your reading, as I recall, you did a lot of reading and studying personally about skeptics. You're also a huge fan, if memory serves me correctly, of classic literature, Marcus Aurelius, Cicero, and others. And so how does that influence both your writing and two, getting that perception, when you're coming across something, are you inherently just, no, I'm not going to believe anything? Or is it that your perspective then steps back for a moment, you lay it out, and then you're able to tell the story in a skeptical kind of way?
Anthony, I got to tell you, from the time I was yay high, I was that kid. I didn't do what I was told. Mm-hmm. I just have a natural rebellious instinct. If the teacher, told me, you need to do this, my first instinct wasn't to be like, okay. My first question was to be like, why? And if it made sense, I said, okay, I'll do that. But if it didn't, I said, since we're on camera, I'll go, no. So I've always, it's in my blood, man. I have a rebellious nature. So I think the reading of the classics, of what classic rebels, you could say, like Cicero, definitely. I think he put the intellect into my emotion. Like, oh, this is why you should follow the rules. This is why we have a limited government. And as far as storytelling goes, I'm always a big proponent of just telling the story as it happened, without much commentary. I want the reader to make their own, conclusions and draw their own inference. I don't want to preach. I let the dialogue, do the talking, so to speak. Like it's for example, the story about my friend who became a skinhead for one summer. It was like a phase he went through.
Yes.
There's a lot I could have said about that, and there's a lot I'll talk to you about it, but I wanted to just tell the story as it was and as it happened.
Let's talk a little bit too about the differences in the storytelling you've had to do, because there are three that stick out in my mind. One is there's the
Yeah.
storytelling you've had to do, working at an institution like the Phoenix.
Yeah.
All right. And then let's talk about the storytelling you have to do in the wrestling manager role you had. And then, of course, there's that last thing, because as an author, because what's interesting to me as an author is that you did a lot of studying of creative writing, yet the two books you've written are both true stories. There's not these aren't fictions that you're writing; these are real stories. So let's talk a little bit about, because I know that you have some wonderful feelings about the Phoenix you like to get out. So let's talk about working at an environment like that and getting stories across while you're there. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. Well, my time at the Phoenix was a very, I picked up very quickly, and I guess this goes back to, the rules, we have rules for you. I noticed very, very quickly working at the Phoenix that there was a set of rules for me and a set of rules for everyone else. But they didn't have to follow the rules that they were telling me to follow. And, in the book, I get into it like, my boss was a gay man, and he would always ogle the guys. He would always talk about, oh, that guy's so hot. Look at his chest. Look at the bulge in his pants and this and that. That's fine, but I purposely would be like, look at the tits on that girl. And he'd be like, whoa, what are you doing? That's out of line. So I didn't work well in a corporate environment, to say the least.
Now, did you realize early that you were just not the corporate type? Or were you thinking I could work someplace else, but I couldn't work at the Phoenix? Or did you say, no, I can't work in this corporate environment no matter what?
No, I just it just felt like, and I think a line I use in the book, just sitting under fluorescent lights all day in an office. It just felt like my life was just draining out of me. My blood was just draining out of me, one moment at a time. It's not my scene. I need to be moving around. I think I would be what would now be described as hyperactive. It's just.
I think they were calling it hyperactive
about it
too. I think so.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So going from
Medfield, it wasn't my.
Going from Medfield, which you've often described as kind of this combination of this 1950s environment that was being thrust upon you, while at the same time it was suffering from a large number of social ills. Going from that environment, and where you say something in the book that, and please correct me if I have my quotation wrong, but I thought it was very interesting. You talked about how you never really felt trapped by it, yet you were willing and ready and eager to get out.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it was, I just knew that, and, if I had grown up in a different time, I guess this would have been different. I'm thinking about, honestly, my parents, my grandparents. Honestly, it was TV and movies. I could see that there was a larger world outside of Medfield, and it looked really interesting to me. I never hated it in Medfield, but I was young and I wanted to see and do other stuff, and and I wanted to meet other people. I wanted to get out. I wasn't trapped. I wasn't chained here by any stretch of the imagination. But it was, I was young and dumb, full of cum, and I wanted to go see and do stuff, which I did.
Yes, because I think one of the things you described yourself as, you were a young man, and I don't think you're alone in this. A young man who wanted to be a famous writer, which, by the way, that may be relatively unique, but also you wanted to be able to, get lots of sex, and drink a lot. Those were the kind of things, which are kind of normal for a lot of young men.
I think so, and I think young men honestly kind of need to own that. Just roll with it. Be cool, but just go with it.
Well, I think one of the things too that's interesting in both the books that you write, though, is you talk about this wild side of yourself, and at the same time, you also get pretty open about these relationships you're in which I think it's fair to say that a lot of the growth for you as a person is you describing your relationships with these other people, both women and then two other guys who you probably know I'm going to mention in a moment. And
Yeah, sure.
so let's start first with those relationships with the women, because you did I thought, a pretty fair job of being able to not only explain how your heart was broken, but also try and lay out how they were feeling at that particular time in the relationships with you. What made you decide that you absolutely had to have that in your book?
Yeah, in the first book, at the time that I was coming up in the world of professional wrestling, my relationship with my girlfriend was just completely being obliterated. And honestly, it was my first adult relationship, my first adult breakup. So you don't have any template for that, so it was hard. And trying to settle scores in memoirs is cheap. And again, I went back, and honestly, a lot of the dialogue from my ex-girlfriend at that time came from emails, of hers that I saved, because I wanted the reader to get a fair and balanced perspective of what was going on. So yeah, actually, a friend of mine, a woman, she read my first book, and she goes, "I think you've invented a new genre called dick lick." Yeah, that was funny.
Okay. but that's actually probably not a bad description, because you're one of the look, for
It's not
example, I can't remember his name. There's the writer out there, Max something or other, in which he
Tucker
writes
Max.
in which he writes
Tucker Max. He's a lawyer.
he writes exactly, unfortunately, he is one of us who writes this book in which he's such a prick, but is almost bragging about being a prick. What I noticed
Right.
in your books are, you talk about the period in which you're a prick, and it becomes pretty clear that while you can write from the position of where you were then, you're not really proud of those moments.
No. And Rich Palladino, the great ring announcer here in New England,
Yep.
read my first book, and we were talking about the moment where I just really let loose on my girlfriend, and basically he got it, because he said, "You cut a promo on her," which is what I did.
Yes.
I went into manager or champion's role, and I cut a promo on her that was so vicious that she was like, "That was so vicious and hurtful. I am no longer in love with you." And live and learn. Words are weapons, sharper than knives.
Well, I also want to talk about, because one of the things that you do, I think, very well, particularly in Until We're Strangers Again, is you give a pretty good look as to what happens on the independent scene behind the curtains. You very quickly get an idea as to where everybody is stacking up. Who's winding their careers down, who's clearly on the upside, and who's hanging on for dear life when they should probably let it go, and who's just happy where they are. How long did it take you to make that kind of observation? Did you notice it immediately, or were you around a bit before you started to figure out, oh yeah, this guy fits that one, this guy fits that one, this guy fits that one?
I probably started to notice it around the time that I met you.
Oh.
Not saying that you fit in any of those categories.
No, I was the old man hanging around a little bit too long. That's what I was.
I think that, no, I mean, if I remember correctly, I mean, it seemed like you were just like, this is my last run, and I'm going to have fun, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that seemed to be your attitude at the time, yeah. But there are some guys who can't give up the ghost. I won't mention any names, but I'm sure we're thinking of similar people.
Yes.
They're still around, honestly.
Yes. Keeping in mind, I live on the West Coast, so I there are no seats to give
right.
me.
Yeah, right. But I'm trying to think. No, Chaotic was actually a company that I thought was there was very distinct. It was mostly guys on their way up, on their way to the WWE, and on the other side, it was guys that were winding their career down.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. That's life, I guess. definitely wrestling.
Well, let's talk about this as well, because one of the things that you had to learn, I think, relatively quickly, and keeping in mind, a lot of people are forgetting this, but during that time period, there was not as much work, real work available for wrestlers as you're seeing now. Certainly, there wasn't, as we saw when I was starting off, and you still had the territories and those things were happening. You came in
Yeah.
which New England, and a lot of people may not realize this, New England has just a plethora of wrestling talent and wrestling promotions, and wrestling schools, unlike any
Yeah.
other region I can think of in the country, really. And so a lot of people who become wrestlers wind up either going through there or coming from there. So you were there at a time period in which people weren't thinking, "Oh, I can go from here to 6 different kinds of big territories." There was WWE, and WCW was dying, I think, around the time you came in.
Right.
It was
Yeah.
dying or dead. ECW was finished. There
Yeah.
was no place else to go. So
No.
tell us about learning in that environment how to tell a story as a manager, because some people don't realize how difficult, and I'm going to say this completely, it is extremely difficult to know how to do the managerial role, because so many people see on TV, oh, I jump in and I interfere all the time, right?
Right.
So tell us, what were some of the things that you learned? And with that, let's also see, what are some of the mistakes you saw others make that you knew you didn't want to make?
Well, I mean, there weren't a lot of other managers around. I mean, there just weren't. And you're right, by the way, and I'm glad you recognize that. Thank you for recognizing that, because a lot of people look at a manager and think, well, I could do that. That looks easy. It's not, or at least it's not easy to do it well.
That's what it is. It is not
Yeah.
easy to do. I may catch some heat for this, but I'll say it. Paul Jones, I thought, was a great wrestler. I didn't think he was a great manager.
I'm sorry. Who?
Yeah, Paul Jones. He was before your time, son. Before your
Paul
time.
Jones. Yeah, no, I know who he is, but you're right. He was a terrible manager.
Yeah, Mr. Fuji was a fine wrestler, not necessarily
Right.
as great as a manager. Again, in my estimation, Bobby Heenan, of course, was a more than capable wrestler and maybe the greatest manager of all time. J.J. Dillon, all of those people, Jimmy Hart, Jim Cornette, people who took it to a next level. So what was part of your figuring out that process on how to do it well? Because it's fair to say, I don't want to embarrass you, but when we think about the people in New England who were managers, you are one of those people, I think, who really did earn a strong following and a strong reputation, left a very good legacy.
Oh, well, thank you. I have to say, there was no school to learn how to be a manager. And actually, all of my education to be a professional wrestling manager are sitting on a shelf right behind me right now. Jim Cornette and Bobby Heenan did a series of interviews with Ring of Honor, and Cornette did a few just solo secrets of the ring, where he talked about how to be a good manager. There was nothing else, and I just literally sat there with a pen and a pad, just like I was in college or whatever, and just taking notes. Don't stand on a hard cam. Be invisible until it's time for your spot. The art of the promo, the go home promo, say the name of the town over and over again. Stuff like that. Stuff that just isn't taught anywhere at all. Less now than even then.
Yeah, I think that is one of the things that, again, back then, you're right, there weren't as many people teaching it. I think that fortunately there are more schools out there that I think where you've got some really great, capable people. I mean, Santino Brothers is closed right now, but they'll reopen. EWF will reopen. Hustler, Rip Rogers is out there, and God knows if Rip is teaching it, it's going to be spot on. It's going to work. Rudy Boy Gonzalez is out there. Les is still out there. But I think it's interesting because you're learning how to tell a story in a totally different way than you learned as a writer. So let's talk a little bit about what you had to learn physically to get to tell that physical story of where things were going and how you started picking up on an audience as to what was working and what wasn't.
As far as writing goes?
Yes.
Okay, so at Emerson, for those who don't know, a creative writing program, you're gonna be in creative writing workshops, which to me had pretty much run their course by my junior year of college. So the way that a creative writing course works is you write a story and you make copies of it, like physical copies, and you give it to the class. The class reads it, and then you workshop it. You sit in a circle, just like kindergarten,
No.
and everyone shares their thoughts about the story. And yeah, so man, I got to be honest. It was about my junior year when it was the head of the writing and literature department at Emerson took me aside. His name was John Spoils, very good man, and he said, "Corin, look, he didn't say outright like you kind of graduated from workshops. He's just like, but we're going to do a directed study one-on-one, and I think I did 3 directed studies with him, where I got credit as a class, but he would just give me a stack of books, a huge stack of books to read every week. Here's what you're going to read, and you're going to give me, I think it was something like 25, maybe 50 pages a week. And I think that those one-on-one directed studies I did with Spoils is really where I got my teeth as a writer.
But do you think that those sessions, both the roundtables and the one-on-one sessions, would you say that that was similar to riding in the car with the boys, talking about what was happening in the matches, talking about the reactions you were getting, and then going from there? I don't know if you did that as much as we did.
I'm sorry, you're going to have to repeat the last part of that.
Sure. I don't know if you did. When I broke in, one of the things that happened was you were always going to shows with the fellow wrestlers, and after shows you were riding around, and you'd be in the car and you'd be talking about all of that stuff.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, and did you find that it was similar with the writing roundtables?
No, not for me. Because again, in wrestling, I was an autodidact, as I say. I was, to become a wrestling manager, it was all self-taught. Whereas, learning to be a writer, it was a very straightforward scholarly process. The wrestling manager thing was all me, to be honest. Just me in my room with a pen and pad watching those shoot interviews with Bobby Heenan and so forth.
Now let's talk about what I think is probably a magical period for you, and that is when you got together with diehard Eddie Edwards and the Big Daddy Cat, DC Dillinger. Tell us about Sabotage. What made Sabotage work?
What made Sabotage work was, as they say, lightning in a bottle, the chemistry that can't be manufactured, processed, or even sold. We just were like chocolate and peanut butter from the first day that we started working together. And as I say in the book, it was like our brains were connected with telegraph wires. During a match, didn't even have to say a word. Like Eddie Edwards could just give me a look, and I knew, okay, grab the guy's leg. Whereas, with other guys, that sort of a spot would have to be planned, but not with Dave and not with Eddie. They just give me a look, and I knew what to do, and I grew up, as I write about in the book, in the 80s, with hair metal and so forth. And I had always wanted to meet 2 other guys who wanted to drink all the booze, have sex with all the women, and be the best on the show. And that was our goal each and every night. And, we just wanted to dominate. We wanted to rule. We wanted to kick ass. And I think that we were probably the last generation that remembered the territories where we didn't look at going into a show. We didn't look at a promoter and be like, "What are you going to do for me?" And just give me my envelope. We were looking through the curtain and we were counting heads. And we were like, well, how can we get more people in here next time? Maybe if we start a riot, more people will come next time. You know what I mean? And that's a very old school territorial philosophy, which I think, quite frankly, works the best on independence, because the independence is really a microcosm of the old territories.
I think that you're dead on. And one of the things is, and I tell this to often with lawyers as we're talking about what to do, because we obviously don't see the same audience unless we're talking about judges. The jury we have today is not the jury we're going to see next week. We're not trying to bring them back in the house. But what we are trying to do is get
Right.
that whole story apart. We don't get to do long storylines. You only have that one trial to do, or that one brief.
Yeah.
But that idea of, when we come in and we show up, and I know attorneys like this, who they come to town,
Yeah.
they walk in, their thought is, I want people walking away saying, that was a hell of a trial lawyer. I want people thinking that's the greatest trial lawyer I've ever seen. That's what I want.
Yeah.
Now, unfortunately, we don't get the
Yeah.
same groupies. I mean, we don't. I can tell you now, I have never in my entire life ever had somebody watch a trial and then wanted to sleep with me. It's never, at least as far as I know, it never happened. But Ebony Blade, on the other hand, had a very different experience, particularly in the 90s. It's just a very.
I'll bet you did.
So now, one of the things that as well that you grapple with in your stories, and because of the sound issues, I'm going to save some of the questions I'm going to have for next. I'm going to bring it back, Sean, because we've got to get you on. There's so much to talk about with you. But I want to be able to talk about, you've dealt with grief on two different levels, I think. One obviously was with your brother Tim, and the other was when Daddy Cat died. And so,
the last
when DC passed away.
Oh, DC, yeah, okay.
Yeah, when DC passed away. And so those are two very different elements of grief there. One is obviously your brother by blood. The other, I think it's fair to say, is your brother in a totally different way. And yet both those deaths also were, while shocking, in some ways not fully surprising for you either.
Yeah.
And let's talk a little bit about that, about how you handle a grief for a death that is both not surprising, but at the same time will elicit so many emotions. For people who don't know, DC died in his sleep, and Tim, Tim killed himself. And I have to tell you, the sections on Tim at the end of the book were just heartbreaking. So, how do you deal with those kind of griefs to where you're able to turn around and get back to telling not just your story, but in many ways, you told Tim and DC's. You didn't even know you were telling DC's story when you wrote "Until We're Strangers Again."
Yeah. I did. Yeah.
And I hope you're glad that you did tell that story, especially his relationship with Nikki and how he handled that. Let's talk. How do you get through that?
Well, as I think the line that I use in the book with regards to the death of my brother was, it didn't come out of the blue, but what did I say? Shit, now I don't remember what I wrote. It came out of the blue, but not necessarily the deep blue.
Yes.
I think that's the line that I used. Because his life was spiraling out of control. The thought had crossed my mind that he was going to die. He was going to die young. I wouldn't have guessed in a million years that he was going to commit suicide. Because, and this is again I say in the book, he definitely bucked the trend in the psychology books and so forth, because they say that people commit suicide will often mention it, or they'll have an attempt at some point in their life. None of that. Ever. Ever. I mean, he never once mentioned suicide. Ever. Never once attempted suicide. Ever. At least not that I'm aware of. So I guess his death was not so much shocking, but the way that he did it definitely was, to say the least. As far as DC goes, well, he said it himself, and obviously I wrote "Until We're Strangers Again" before he passed away. But he did. I mean, he talked about his sleep apnea, and he would never, he wouldn't even take Advil PM or anything like that because he was terrified of dying in his sleep. It was something that hung over his head, which must be a hell of a thing. When you put your head in the pillow each night, thinking this might be it. That's a heavy thing to deal with. So again, certainly his death was shocking, but not terribly unexpected. But what you referenced earlier what Marcus Aurelius and Stoic philosophers. And if I may say, I think our society needs a little more stoicism nowadays. Just because you're feeling an emotion doesn't mean you need to perform that emotion. That's just my opinion. But anyway, in reading Marcus Aurelius, he said, in Meditations, uh, you know, even the most tragic things in life are to be expected. As I say, I boiled the Stoic philosophy down to shit happens, and I know that might sound flippant in talking about the death of one of my closest friends and the suicide of my brother,
But it does.
but it served me well. It does. It does. It's what got me through. It really is. I never thought that I'd be cracking books from, the Greek and Roman era to get me through grief, but it fucking helped, man. It really did.
Yeah, that and combined with you talking about being at, I was remember being really happy when I read it. One of my favorite places on earth, Bullets.
Yeah. Yeah.
Being at Bullets in New Orleans.
Oh, have you been there?
Oh,
been
yes, I've been
there?
yes,
Oh my god, that's so funny. Yeah,
yes,
that's
indeed, I've been to Bullets.
funny.
And
Okay.
yeah, when I was first at Bullets, that was, for those who don't know, Bullets is a great bar out in New Orleans, out in the 7th Ward, I think, if memory serves me correctly. And it is lively, great jazz, great people. Admittedly, if you're timid, you may not want to be in the neighborhood. You gotta walk in,
Yeah.
know what you're doing. But it's incredibly friendly. The music is fantastic because New Orleans.
Yes.
Yeah, the food is fantastic. I think. I must have had probably like, I can't count how many drinks I've had there, and how many po' boys. But I think you had the catfish sandwich, which is fantastic.
I did.
But one of the things was I noticed you talking about it in the book about being in New Orleans and kind of realizing as well that this is how it is, that bad things are going to happen. While you're here, you've got to enjoy everything you possibly can. And the sad thing too is, I've spoken to Kevin Von Erich about this before. The good thing about being close to siblings is you've got these great relationships with people you're close to. The bad thing about it is one of you is going to have to be the last one.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things you do well in that story, there is no avoiding that. And I think that as a storyteller, and for other people that are telling stories, travelers, etc., sometimes it's okay to say, look, there is going to be a bad answer to this. There isn't going to be a good one. We're going to do the best we can with the facts we have, but we are not going to get the perfect solution. It can't be done. In wrongful death cases, right? All you can do is give them money. You can't bring them their son back. You can't give them their husband, their daughter back. All you can do is give them money. So we're going to accept that and go. And yeah, they'll take the money, but it's not going to change anything. And in some cases, it's here it's the criminal. We deal with this a lot with someone has to pay, but this isn't the guy who's supposed to pay. And I think that one of the things that was really good about that, Sean, is, and tell us as well, because it was interesting to me when you're writing the book, you keep making mention of being 38. And what was interesting to me was, of course, I first met you when you were so much younger. And so that developed, and I remember when I started getting older too, because there's a great line you use, I think you got from somebody else, where you're talking about how the 20s is really where you do these disastrous things. And then life teaches you how to live, because you look back at some of the things you did when you were younger and you're like, Jesus Christ, why did I do that? So I want to ask you, have you found that maybe as you've gotten older, you are more bothered by the bad things you did you got away with than the bad things you did that you got in trouble for?
No. 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 I honestly don't regret any of it, because you know what it is, man. At the end of the day, as you get older, it's like a tapestry or a quilt. Of multicolors all coming together, and the bad colors and the good colors are all fused together to make up the person that is you now. And the more diverse colors that tapestry have means a more diverse and full person that you are. You know, I mean, and I think I said in Stories from the Handbasket, one of the things that you realize as you get older, that all those cliches that sound really fucking lame when you're like young, like you need to go to the lowest valley to appreciate the highest mountain. Well, guess what? That's true.
Well,
You know?
it is. It is.
It is.
It's absolutely true. You know, and it's almost like, as we often say, if you're always there's Emily Dickinson, I think, who wrote that success is measured sweetest by those who ne'er succeed. And it's almost the feeling of, you know, we've seen this in wrestling bookings, the chase, always chasing for the title, always chasing, always chasing. Then they finally get it, and they don't hold on to it for 10 years, you know, or 5 years. You know, it's
Right.
a few months and it's gone. But it was the chase that was it,
Yeah.
and it was only by all that missing it that made that final moment the big
Yes.
winner. And I think one of the things that's really good, I want to compliment you on this, is you do such a good job in those books of laying out your chase to be a better person,
Yeah.
even when you didn't know you were doing it, your chase to be a better
Yep.
friend, your chase to be a better boyfriend. And there's a moment that you talk about with Nikki and DC when you guys are watching Nikki, and Nikki was the girlfriend of DC for a while, and then they broke up. And then she shows up on TNA, on TV. And people are expecting this really terrible reaction from DC. And what do you
Right.
do? You know, go ahead and
I'm
tell us.
really proud of her.
Yeah.
DC, and it just like he was texting her. We were watching her now. Just for some little background
Yeah.
for the people watching this. DC, you know, got Nikki into the business. They were dating. You know, they were engaged. He got her into the business. They broke up. She was still in the business. She succeeded. You know, and went to the next level. He did not. So we're sitting there at George Carroll's apartment and watching her. Dave's watching her, his ex-fiance, who he got in the business on national television, pay-per-view, and he would think that he would just be seething with this anger, you know, but he wasn't. He picked up his phone and he was texting her. He said, "Dave, what are you doing?" He said, "I'm texting Nicole right now. I'm telling her that I'm really proud of her." I miss that guy, man. I really do. You know, he just had just such a big heart, and in many ways, he was a much better man than I will ever be. You know, I'm not so sure I would have that reaction.
You know, well, that's the thing. Are you sure you would have that reaction? I'm sure you wouldn't have had that reaction then. But you now, do you think you'd have that kind of reaction?
No. No.
A heel to the core. A heel to the core. He won't give it up. He just won't.
No.
Give it up.
I'm not that evolved, Ebony. What can I say?
See, that's it's funny because some people wouldn't understand as well, because there's some people who are hearing this who only know me, this side of me as a lawyer, who are hearing, what's with the Ebony all the time? And they don't realize wrestlers tend to call each other by their wrestling names all the time.
Oh, right, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's how I met you.
Exactly.
I mean,
all the time.
just that, yeah, yeah.
You know, I mean, I love
Yeah.
telling this particular.
Well,
Yeah.
I have to tell you this great story.
Do it. Tell me the story.
So we said about your name in this podcast that's happening right now. Okay. So we set up the time to do this, right? And because I'm elderly, I still use an actual wall calendar that I write things on. Okay. So for Thursday, June 11th, I just wrote on my calendar, Ebony, 6:30. Okay. My girlfriend sees this.
Oh God!
And she goes, "Yeah, wait, no, you're gonna love this." She looks at the calendar and she looks at me and she goes, "What are you doing on Thursday? Is there like a black stripper coming over here?" She's like, "Who is Ebony and what are you doing with her at 6:30?" And then I have to explain who you are and what I'm doing. She's like, "What?" Or whatever. You're weird. Just go do that. I thought you'd get a kick out of that. My girlfriend thought you were a black stripper that was going to come around.
Yeah, I've gotten that a lot. A lot of my wife's friends hear the wrestling name and they think, was he a porn star? You know?
Yeah. Ebony Law.
Yeah, they hear Ebony Blade and they're like, Yeah, we.
I'm sorry, I had to tell you that story. I thought that was great.
No, I think it's a great story because it happens all the time. I mean, one of the ones I always love to bring up is the sitting around at the old Squared Circle Academy, and we're all talking, and Kyle and Matt, these two guys who ran the company, ladies and gentlemen, who were talking, and everybody's sitting there, and Jose Perez is there, and they keep sitting there and they're talking, and they're talking about, and then Eric will do this, Eric will do that, and then Jose sips and goes, "Wait a minute, so what? Who's Eric?"
Yeah, right.
They go, "Well,
There's an
that,"
Irish guy?
and Jose turns and looks at me and says, "Your name's Eric?" And I'm like, "Wait a minute.
Yeah.
You've known me 7 years and you don't know that that's my name?" And he goes, "No, I thought you're," and then he stopped for a moment. And I said, "Did you really think my parents named me Ebony Blade?" And he was like,
Happened.
"That's right." And he had me there.
Yeah.
So that's it. Well, Sean, I want to thank you very much for joining us here. We are going to bring you back. For one, we want to get you on here when we've got all the technical stuff perfectly well. And again, these are two books we want to talk about, folks. We've just scratched the surface of what we can do on these books, because one of the things that he talks about, we want to get into really that life of switching from Medfield to Boston, because I think that there's a great story to be told from, it's fair to say, the suburban kid who now has to become the city kid, and how he melds those stories to create stories. And I want to encourage you as well, if you have not picked up these books, again, Until We're Strangers Again, and also Stories from the Handbasket by Sean Gorman. They're available at great booksellers. The Kindle editions are available on Amazon, and that's what I always use, the Kindle editions. Really, pick them up, because, and I'm not just saying this because I like Sean, because Sean will also tell you, there's a ton of things we disagree on completely, just a huge amount.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we do these little shots on Twitter from time to time. But he is just such an intriguing young man, and also so well written. He really does write well, draws you into the stories. I think you're really gonna enjoy it, and we're gonna look forward to bringing him back again very, very soon, because there's a lot more to write about. And I got to tell you, Sean, I know it's been about a year since I've seen you. I'm looking forward. I was hoping I'd see you this year at the New England Hall of Fame thing, but that's been canceled. I'm hoping to get
almost to the day, actually.
Yeah. Yep, that's right.
Last time we saw each other was a year.
That's right, to the
Yeah,
day.
almost to the day. Yeah.
That's right. I still remember your joke too. It's like a slap across the face. Hi, Ebony.
That was a good. What a great night.
That was a great night. Yeah, we'll tell you more about that story another time, ladies and gentlemen. But yes, I'm hoping to look forward to see you again, especially hoping to see you in that hall. God knows.
Oh, thank you. Well, I don't know. After I shit all over it the last time I was there, we'll see how that goes. When people ask me what our relationship is like, I always say, read the letters of Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, and you'll understand Ebony.
We've all been there. We've all.
Yes.
So, folks, I want to thank you
Good to talk to you, my friend.
on Wrestling with the Law and stuff. Again, had a great time with Sean. We'll figure out more of these tech issues. The first one we've had, but we're going to fix it, and we're going to bring him back, because you've got to hear his voice and his storytelling. It's something. If you catch him on a book tour, stop by, go see him. It's absolutely fantastic. We'll look forward to seeing you again, folks. We'll have another posting up. We'll probably record the next broadcast so I can make sure that I get all the squeaks out. In the meantime, remember, whatever it is you're wrestling with, let's go ahead and wrestle with it together. All right? Thank you. We'll see you soon. Sean.